After a sell-off like that, it might be time to take a look at some simpler stuff like staples, like foods, like snacks. George Tsilis, overlooked stock of the day is Nomad Foods. And what a chart, George, that you know is breaking out basically. Frozen food business. Tell me about it.
Yeah, I mean, look, there's a lot going on right now in the defensive areas of the market. I mean, consumer staples, a lot of food stocks in the United States have done well, and obviously there's a lot of movement of capital to the European markets. And so Nomad Foods sort of fits both of those variables, you know, European growth and their equities. Also, it's a defensive name because this is essentially one of the larger frozen food sellers, manufacturers and sellers in the UK and Europe. They're second to Unilever, which is, of course, the larger conglomerate in staples and food-based business. So Nomad's is the second largest in the frozen foods, but they focus mostly on, you know, fish products and nutritional foods, and majority of their sales, about 30%, are in the UK. But if you look at the breakdown, the rest of their sales are amongst the other 15 large nations in Europe. So obviously, this is a good momentum trade in this recent environment, particularly since January, when we're starting to see some big pickup in, of course, the European names and the U.S. dollar falling, and even our equities, you know, basically listless to the downside. And this is a company that's, you know, growing consecutively. If you look at their 10-year growth rates, consecutive-wise, they've increased top-line sales for 10 years. EBITDA is continuing to grow. They did report earnings as well, where they actually beat the estimates for both sales and EPS. Their adjusted earnings growth was around 2 to 4%. If you look at their top line sales, organic growth was between 1 and 3%. So it's not a growth company. It's more of an income and a value-based name, but it's also presented itself as a great value and defensive name, particularly in this environment. If you do consider even the U.S., like I said, food stocks, Tyson, Mondelez, Hershey's, just looked at that stock higher by 3.5% today. But there's obviously some appetite now for defensive rotation as well.
Okay. George, definitely seems like it's catching some of that rotation bid. But also, we were hearing about the international markets firming up. I know they're big in Europe, so maybe there's something to be said there.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, obviously, today you're seeing some of the European defense contractors go higher because of what's happening politically and geopolitically, and of course, with Ukraine and such. But at the same time, there's still a bid for a lot of these staple stocks. I saw Unilever was higher today. But nonetheless, I think the rotation into the European markets is a function of maybe some value divergence. In other words, maybe some overvalued names in the United States, undervalued names in Europe, but also the currency. The United States dollar has been relatively weak as of late. And of course, even today, the euro firmed up. And I think that's also creating a catalyst for, you know, all the stocks in Europe. And then you got to look at the defensive names and inflationary hedges as well. And that includes the food names. So Nomad, again, is one of these certainly stocks to consider. Now, I will say this, you know, it's not growing very much, but they do pay a pretty generous dividend, about 68 cents US dollars dividends per annum. They're earning about $1.98 in terms of EPS, which they did raise their EPS for 2025 as a business from $1.94 to $1.98. So for what it's worth, they can handle that dividend, and they also, you know, pay it generously as well.
Okay. It seems like a decent place to hide out if you're looking for it, overlapping with some of the themes we've been talking about all day. International exposure, staples, a kind of defensive tilt to the business, but you've also got good price momentum behind it too with the big move. Thanks, George. All right, nice. Good.